I don't think there's one right way to do grief. David Kessler says death is universal, but your grief is personal. And I love that because just because somebody else has had a loss like you doesn't mean that you're going to feel like them and you're not going to heal yourself like the way they're healing. I don't think everything around grief needs to be heavy. Like I know that it's a difficult thing to speak about, and which is why few people want to talk about it. But I think that grief, as the quote goes, grief is the price you pay for love.
Welcome to another episode of Someone Like Us, the podcast where we, your host, Joelle, Anne, and me, share our stories and experiences while living abroad. We hope somewhere someone like us will find some comfort from our podcast. Today, we are diving into a topic that all of us, and probably many of you, have carried at some point in your life: grief.
For each of us here, grief has looked a little different. Personally, as someone who's migrated to other country and faced mental health challenges, multiple ones, I've learned that grief isn't just about actually losing someone, it's also about losing home and identity and older versions of yourself.
And that's why we are so grateful to have this conversation today with someone who truly gets it and who's made it her life's work to walk alongside grief and not around it. We are joined by Krittika Sharma, a grief counselor, death meditation facilitator, and a global voice in end-of-life care. For over 11 years, she has been deepening her work at the intersection of grief, healing, and yoga-based well-being through initiative Maajhi. Recognized by Forbes, Krittika has worked with Fortune 100 companies like Pfizer and Merck, and she is the former director of Death Over Dinner, part of the world's largest social campaign around end-of-life conversations with over 200,000 dinners hosted globally. Krittika is also the founder of Maajhi, a pioneering grief and death awareness platform helping people navigate loss through empathy, meaning, and presence. It's the first of its kind in India and is now growing globally. She's trained under the renowned grief expert David Kessler, founder of grief.com. Krittika, welcome to the show. We are so happy you're here.
Thank you.
Oh.
It was so lovely to hear all your voices before I started. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
That was a long introduction. Krittika, what can't you do? Can you tell me, please? Because that was long. Damn.
She's done a lot, a
Mhm.
lot.
Oh, you guys are too kind. I think I was just fortunate to find my purpose and I don't want to waste any time not doing it. So, yeah.
It's amazing. So let's start with your story. You've spoken about how a deeply personal experience sparked your passion for grief and end of life care. Would you be willing to share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just like before I start the story, I think it's very important for all of you and of course anyone who's listening to this to know that I was a very death fearing person. Somebody could say the word death to me and I would really bring the house down because it was such a difficult thing to imagine my loved ones not being here or, sometimes the biggest fears we have is losing, as you rightly said, parts of ourselves. And for me, I actually started my career as a textile designer and a professional musician. And one day, that dreaded phone call came, and one of my loved ones was very sick. And that experience was really shattering because it was the way that it was told to me that I thought that the person actually passed away. Luckily, the person survived, but it kind of made me a caregiver overnight. It changed my role and my relationship to what a family construct is. And, while I sat in the hospitals for months on end, I guess, medicine was doing what it was doing, technology was doing what it was doing, but nobody was there to speak to the emotional and human side of it in terms of the worry, the fear, even in terms of what we had to do in the hospital. Our role was just, you kind of just winged it. And my background is in research. And so when I was sitting in the hospital, I wondered how I could use my human centered knowledge to, to be a part of the conversation and the ecosystem. And I think that at that point in time, I didn't really have time to go and be a doctor. Not to, I don't think I had the capacity to be one as well. But I really wanted to understand how I could be part of the healthcare system or a part of a system which deals with health and well-being. And that sort of inspired me to change my trajectory. I applied to OCAD University here in Toronto and got into a master's program. And sort of, the story sort of unfolded from that. And I focused on looking at lots of projects in the space of healthcare and in the space of well-being, social development sectors, and finally wrote my thesis on looking at the role of dignity in death and dying. And from there, Maajhi came around, there were fellowships and lots of experience that went into continuing to study and learn through experience, academia, and yeah, here we are.
Would you say you're not afraid of death anymore?
Oh, definitely not. I wouldn't say that. There are some places where, of course, it's a human. I think it's a very normal thing to be afraid of death because it is the fear of the unknown. It's something that we don't have enough information about, or even if we have some information, there's no evidence beyond a point that really allows us to understand what happens after death or how much pain somebody might be in. A lot of these things are very personal. And so there's always that fear. I think one of the biggest fears we have in life is the fear of losing our loved ones. So I'm not afraid. If I had to put it this way, I'm definitely more understanding of what death and loss and grief are about. I thought it was important to move towards it and understand it and also unlearn so much of what I thought it was. I'm not afraid of my own death. And over the years, I think I have coped differently about death and dying. But I also think that when I have felt deep grief, I've also allowed myself to feel it, which early on would be very difficult for me to do. There's still a fear of losing the people you love the most. But I think that that fear has converted into, if I fear this, then what can I do about it? What are some of the things I can do to ensure that I can balance that out with let's say connection, with asking questions, with being prepared. And so those things may not completely solve for it because I think in death and dying or looking at end of life care or looking at grief, there's no problem to solve. It's really about being able to feel the emotion, witness it, be present to who needs the space and sort of take it alongside as a human experience. So it's one design, if one thinks about it from a design thinking lens, in design, you think about seeing what a problem is, thinking about what you reframe it as, and then solving for it. I think this is a unique space where you're not necessarily designing to solve, but you're designing to do many other things in it because it's intangible and every experience is different. Like all of you mentioned, you have some experience of loss and grief. And while we can understand that universally, your grief is as sacred and as it's almost as sort of important as like a fingerprint. It's yours and yours alone. It has its own identity. So I I think designing for those pieces has made it very spiritual, but also very meaningful for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's really inspiring to see how you transformed your grief into something that helps others heal. From my personal experience, for some reason, I always feel like I'm very slow to process grief. Let's just say when I attend a funeral of someone that I love, I feel really numb, and then sometimes I feel really guilty of it. And then the sadness didn't reach me until maybe weeks or months after, and I feel extremely sad. So it's a very interesting topic, but I feel like no one really want to talk about it. So yeah, it's really powerful to see that you take on your pain and then turn it into your passion and help other people to discover and help them navigate what has been, I don't know, it's almost like a taboo or something that you shouldn't discuss in our
Yeah.
society.
I agree with Anne, but also the way you started right away with saying that, oh, I was afraid of death, that kind of like spoke to me because I am terrified of death. I'm terrified of my death. I'm terrified of, like my parents' death and like people that I know. And I think it stems from the fear of unknown because I'm genuinely like very anxious about when I have to do something and I don't know how the end is going to be like. So I constantly find myself in this loop where I am thinking just randomly, enjoying my night on the couch, just like chill. And then, bam, of course, my brain is like, you're kind of chill right now. Why don't we spice it up? So then I'm like, bam, I'm thinking about
Wow.
my parents' death, right? And then I'm like, oh no, if I keep thinking, because I guess I'm also a little bit superstitious. So then I'm like, oh my God, I'm keep thinking about like my parents' death and I'm just going to bring that death. So then I'm like trying to think about something else. I run away from it, I guess. I don't want to process that. I just want this feeling to go away because I'm like terrified. So then I'm like chaotically trying to open TikTok, so kind of to get my mind out of this. I am running from grief. And, like how you mentioned it, that you should staying with it. And I think it's really hard to do.
Yeah.
How do you get away from that? How do you just sit with it and, like not be terrified of your own feelings?
Firstly, I just want to acknowledge that I've never heard spicing it up and death in the same sentence. So, unless you're eating really spicy food, which we're not. So that was awesome. To Anne's point, just in terms of, the different kinds of emotions, I think numbness is also an emotion. It's a feeling.
Mhm.
I don't think that when we say the word numb, we automatically think that it means something that's very inactive. Sometimes we are numb because we might be feeling too much. And, it's taken years of therapy to also get to that place of saying, oh, like I can feel numb and I can acknowledge it. And it's fine to feel that way. And maybe it's my body's way or my signal to sort of feel, maybe my body or my mind feels like I can't handle all of it. So it's almost safeguarding me. But as long as I acknowledge it as that and don't treat it as something avoidant, I think that it kind of comes to you when you need to. And I think me, to your point, Brené Brown talks about how one of the hardest emotions to feel is joy. Because when we feel joy, the next minute, like you always feel like this is a moment of joy and it can be taken away because something can happen. And so as you were speaking,
Right.
it was reminding me of how she gave this analogy of, how a mother sometimes will go to their child's cradle and like look at the baby and just say, oh, this is so perfect. And this moment is so perfect. And then suddenly the thought of, what if the child gets bullied? What if I pass away? What is this child going to do? And in that moment, it's sort of, you lose that moment of joy. And again, I think it's perfectly human to have a very peaceful moment. And given how much stress is there in the current environment, politically, socially, environmentally, individually, culturally, I think we've all experienced so much loss and are still sort of experiencing that kind of grief at a global level that
Yeah.
there was a time in our world a few years ago where because of COVID, we couldn't actually go and meet our families. I mean, who could have thought that that would have happened, right? Similar to some of you, I live away from my family. And of course, that is a fear that comes up that, imagine having to take this dreaded flight for I don't know how many hours before you even reach a place. You're not just thinking about the
Yeah.
moment that something goes wrong, but it's everything that takes you to book a flight and, have the logistics in place to even travel, for example. But I think one of the ways that I cope with some of these feelings is I actually go and talk to the person that I'm most worried about with. So I might go up to my parents and say, I feel these things. And sometimes I don't know what I'm going to do without you. And it
Yeah.
opens up a conversation. And I think it also opens up a space to say, okay, what can we do to mitigate that? And
Mm.
sometimes I've needed their help. And sometimes I've slowly gotten in the practice of what is important to me. So for example, and I'm just taking the parent example, but I think this can be applied to many situations. I think for me, going back to India once a year is non-negotiable. It's just something I
Really.
have to do and I want to do. And so
Yeah.
it becomes one way to know that I will connect with my family for a long period of time. there are weekend calls. There are ways to also be more prepared to understand what my parents want, you know, like if there is a
Yeah.
situation that is serious, what do they need so that I can ease those moments if something were to happen. And I think knowing some of those pieces actually in that moment of stress, knowing what the other person wants goes a very long way. I think it relieves us a little bit, or it relieves a little bit of that anxiety and that pain. So I think that there are
Mm-hmm.
ways that we can, I don't want to say control, but I think there are ways that we can humanize some of our loss or some of our grief related feelings. And, it's not perfect. It's not like it solves completely for what happens. But like I said, I don't think it's designed to solve, but it's designed to create more moments of connection and hopefully allow us to sort of heal a little bit through that human experience.
That's so beautiful. I've never thought of it that way. I
Yeah.
even communicate that with my parents because it's such a scary thought to, make them feel like, oh, I'm thinking about this, like kind of
Mm-hmm.
like a guilt thing in a way.
Yeah.
And I it's just I completely ignore it for my own sake because I don't want to think about it. I don't want to go there. It's too painful. And when I first moved to Canada, I used to have thoughts like that
Mm-hmm.
when I'm away from my family and I don't know what to do. But over the time, I've just honestly become numb. And like, I
Mm-hmm.
really don't want to think about it, do not want to deal with it. I just want my life to be fast paced and busy and
Mm-hmm.
just life is like the last thing on my list.
I agree with Joelle. It's a scary topic.
Yeah, and being in Canada, I have lost my dogs back home, and both times was very hard. I was super depressed. I couldn't eat or do anything for days. It was very hard because I couldn't see them before they passed. And yeah, like I've even lost a friend, but at the time I was in India, so I was okay going there. I knew that I could be there at any point, but as soon as I moved to Canada, it's just hard to even think of logistics and feel like, oh, there's a 12-hour gap unless I can be there for my loved ones. So it's very hard to navigate things like that.
Especially during COVID, had affected a lot of people, right? People passed away. People weren't allowed to go in. My grandma passed away. My mom, again, was like this 12, 15-hour flight flying. She literally saw her for maybe like 5 minutes and then that's it. And you cannot not help of thinking it could be in the same situation, right? Uh, my mom was also the first immigrant. So she was also like visiting parents very rarely. And I was like, wow, I'm literally living the same life again. And I'm very scared that the story will repeat itself. But that's also why, we're all going to therapy. And it brings me to the question for Krittika. If you don't mind sharing, do you personally take therapy? And how has it supported you, especially as someone holding space for others people?
Sure. I think I've done different kinds of therapy over the years. And it's really interesting that you asked that question because when I was doing Death Over Dinner in India, so I was the director at that time for the India chapter. And I think I'd spoken to over 500 or 600 people in 6 months. And, I guess the momentum was keeping me going. I was holding space. I was inspired and sort of fueled by what I was hearing. And actually, somebody who had actually come for my Death Over Dinner, who's now a very dear friend of mine, happened to be a therapist. And I met her at the Death Over Dinner. And the next day she asked to meet me. And when I went to meet her, she asked me this question, no hi, nothing. She like literally sat down and said, how do you take care of yourself? And honestly,
Wow.
I hadn't even thought about that because I used to do therapy on and off, like when I needed it, etc. And I didn't realize in that moment how much I needed it. And I'm very grateful that she brought it onto the map for me. And I think many times we feel like when, at least I approached it like this initially, is like whenever something goes wrong, then you go for therapy. But I think being in this space, I really needed it. And not that I needed it out of the weight of holding this. It wasn't from there, but it was really to practice my own mental hygiene. It was really to focus on so many of the changes that have happened in my life for, 10, 12 years. Similar to some of you, I live here by myself. My family is back in India. So, there's the changes of where you're studying, where you're living, the relationships you have, the difficulties in a workspace, for example, or just life in general, right? And
Yeah.
so I felt that it was very important for me to go in to get someone else to hold that space for me. And I tried two types. One is a fairly intellectual, sort of traditional kind of therapy that I go for. And the other one, I do a little bit of a mix of hypnotherapy sometimes when I need it or if I'm dealing with a very difficult emotion. In the past 2 or 3 years, yoga has come back into my life with more depth. I think when I was younger, I would practice it more as, you treat it like exercise. But I think over the past 2, 3 years, yoga has been the one space that allows me to come to the mat just as I am. And it's really helped me through grief, through difficult emotions, things that sometimes, I don't think, I don't think words are enough when someone's grieving. It can substitute some things, but I think that the way we feel it in our entire body. And so some of that movement has been very helpful for me. And then, of course, getting into meditation has been helpful to get into the stillness of it. And so I feel like I practice multiple things to ensure my well being. And it all sounds very serious, but I also feel like I enjoy the other parts of it where it is about, you know, having lighter moments, like, I don't know, solo kitchen dancing sessions. I mean, it's so much fun. Like, I don't think everything around grief needs to be heavy. Like, I know that it's a difficult thing to speak about, and which is why few people want to talk about it. But I think that grief, as the quote goes, like grief is the price you pay for love. And so oftentimes I feel like as much as I lost my dog about 7 months ago, and initially it was so difficult I couldn't even say say her name like without crying, or like even I'd think about it and I would cry. But I think it's also been a privilege to hold this grief because of the amount of love I have for her. I think we're holding that grief in the form of love. And so that reframe is very sort of important for me. I don't think there's one right way to do grief. David Kessler says death is universal, but your grief is personal. And I love that, because just because somebody else has had a loss like you doesn't mean that you're going to feel like them and you're not going to heal yourself like the way they're healing. So I definitely believe that those parts of ourselves are very important to explore, because it is about self-awareness. And like you're all saying, like you are able to identify an emotion, you're able to identify the action that you're taking towards that emotion. That in itself is self-awareness, which many people don't even want to go into identifying a feeling. So I think you're already taking the steps, even though you feel like you're not. And even though you're saying this is hard to talk about, we're talking about it, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that the language of loss is a little bit like language that we already have inside us. We just don't speak it often enough. So, and I think that that's why we don't get into the practice of it. But all of you are speaking so beautifully about it. I wouldn't have thought that this is the first time you're talking about it, or you know, or find it difficult to talk about. You're acknowledging it, which makes it part of the conversation.
Yeah, so that bring me to questions. What are some kind of common therapy approaches to deal with death and loss? Like, how does someone find the one that works for them?
So I think it depends on what somebody is looking for, right? So I think that there are bereavement counselors that really support and focus only on loss, especially a loss of a loved one. I think general therapists can also handle that conversation. So, in my understanding, if I go through a loss, I can still talk to my therapist and my hypnotherapist about it. I would not feel like I need to find somebody else. Sometimes it's peer support. Sometimes it is about doing things that are more body focused, like grief yoga. Paul Denniston is one of the leading experts in doing grief yoga and releasing grief from the body. There's meditation that can support it. There are lots of mental health practitioners that sit in hospices or palliative care spaces that help families deal with grief. So when when a loved one goes into a hospice setting or a long-term care space, there are enough people in palliative care that are taught to deal with loss, which is not just about the person who might be passing away, but it is for the whole family. And then death doulas are they've come up a lot in the recent past, where just like how you
Oh,
have
wow.
one for birth, it's similar. They sort of walk with you in that way. And then I recently got certified as well as a grief coach. It's not necessarily like a medical certification, but I think many aspects of grief and loss are not to do with medical situation. It is really about someone being able to have a tough conversation or being able to not feel alone. And all of this is all very human centric. It's not really about the medical aspect of it. Although if somebody finds themselves in what we call as complicated grief, where if after the loss of a loved one, there's difficulty in somebody being able to function even for basic activities, like, maybe they lose their job, maybe they can't get out of bed, it's getting to a point where it's no longer a phase, but it's just become their life, where nothing is really working for them. Like they're isolated, they don't talk to anyone, they are not taking care of themselves, they might even be self-harming. Then it's very important to have a therapist who can actually prescribe medication. And I say that it's very important to take medication at that time, not because somebody is weak, but it is in support of them getting to a place where they can slowly start understanding why they are feeling the way that they are. And it is really a support to get them to a place that can be more true to who they are. And I say that I'm very careful when I speak about that, because a lot of people do come and ask me like, can I take medication? And I'm like, it depends. You have to go to somebody who is certified in actually prescribing that medication to you. And also you need to know you need to understand from that person why they're giving it to you. It could be a chemical imbalance. It could be something that needs to be medically fixed so that it facilitates your grief and your healing journey.
Wow. Yeah, I'd say therapy was a huge part of my journey too. It was kind of hard for me to start it because I just genuinely felt like I don't think that I should be going, but also don't feel like I'm enjoying what is happening. I also always thought that in order to go to therapy, you kind of have to be like more extreme, if I can say so. I think what helped me is like all my friends were going to therapy and they're all like, "Girl, this is what you need to do," and I did, and it's really been amazing. But what I found interesting, Krittika, is you mentioned hypnotherapy. I don't think a lot of people do that. I would say this is something I don't know anyone that actually done hypnotherapy before. So if you don't mind sharing, could you let us know like how exactly sessions are going? How is it helping you?
So I want to say that I haven't done it for a while, but many times what I do is it's basically a practice that uses guided hypnosis to help people reach a state of focused concentration and a little more heightened suggestibility. And so there are times where if, let's say, an emotion is so large for me that I cannot not being able to function, like, and I think I'd mentioned this to you when we had met, the past 2 years, I had a series of losses of every kind. And it was nonstop. Like, it was like if something started, that would end and something else would begin. And I felt like those were moments where I couldn't fully sit in front of my therapist and intellectualize it. And I'm very good at that. I'm very good at sitting in front of my therapist and intellectualizing everything. But the minute, somebody says, how do you feel? I'm like, oh, okay, bye, see you. Like it's like I want to run away from those moments, which are actually the groundbreaking moments in when we go into therapy. So I think that this just allows me to go into a slightly more meditative space. It allows me to go a little deeper into managing maybe things that have come up from a past experience that I'm unable to relate to at this point in time, but I'm not tapping into it, but it allows me to center myself slightly differently. It allows me to have more of a sort of body experience rather than just everything that's happening in my head. And so I actually went my last hypnotherapy session was when I lost my dog and I was angry for weeks. And I didn't know where this anger was coming from. And while I was talking to my hypnotherapist, for example, she just, she would just keep saying, she just kept quiet for like the 20-minute rant that I had. And then she said, you do realize that you're grieving, right? And
Mhm.
I felt so removed from the grief in that moment because I was so angry. But I think, they say that anger is a form of grief. And so it's probably the layer, you know, over grief in some ways. It's sort of more, maybe one feels like you're more in control of it, or maybe one doesn't want to cry, or and so it was really helpful to go into that space and be able to feel all the things that I was feeling. I think it's given me more access to my feelings than maybe just sitting and speaking to someone. But I've needed both. So I think hypnotherapy is great if one feels like they relate to it. I do, but it's also something I don't need as regularly. I think I use it for me, it's helped through cute moments. So that's what I kind of use it for. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting to know. I wish I had met you last year because I was going through kind of a life changing event. And it was the first time I decided to start doing therapy, but I couldn't stop myself from crying. The moment I started talking to my therapist, we just cry. And then when I start crying, I can't do anything. As you say, you can't really share what's going through your head because you feel overwhelmed. And then I think at that point, my therapist trying to do cognitive behavior therapy with me. But seriously, it didn't work because I was very overwhelmed. It didn't work. So I stopped doing that. Eventually, I think it took me almost a year until I can fully recover from that event. At first I thought hypnotherapy is like woo woo. It's only it must be available only on movie and fictions, but it's really interesting from your experience. So I wish I had met you earlier. Yeah,
Also,
I think that would be beneficial to me at that time.
Mhm. Also, sorry, I just realized I didn't answer your question about how to find a therapist that works for you. I think it's a little bit like window shopping. I hate saying it, but like dating, where you have to go and understand whether that person is for you. And and I think it's okay to do that. I think therapists also have their own way of understanding whether they can support you or not. And for me, I think what's worked is to have somebody that's culturally close to me. So both my therapists actually are in India, and sometimes I wake up at 6:30 to speak to them in the morning, or sometimes I have therapy sessions very late at night. But I think them understanding my background, my cultural upbringing allows a little more comfort versus going to somebody. And, they're wonderful people and healers all over the world. It just depends on who you get along with and who you feel safe with. But I think that those things really add up. And I also think the most intangible thing is actually going with your gut. It's very hard to explain, but sometimes you can feel very comfortable with someone and you know that they're going to sort of do right by you, supporting you, but also being able to give you different perspectives without you feeling defensive or feeling afraid to open up to them. And I think crying has to your point, and I feel like sometimes if we're in acute grief, nothing helps. Like I found it very hard to be in therapy in the initial months because I was just of grief, because sometimes nothing's helping. That person can just keep saying, I'm sorry for your loss. And you're like, yeah, like you can be sorry, but that doesn't help me. And there's so much emotion that you're feeling that you're not making sense of. You might not be making sense of what they're saying. But I also sometimes feel like, I don't know if this has happened to you, but sometimes in cry around people I feel very safe with. They're not telling me that they're going to be safe, but the fact that I can feel it allows me to process and heal with them. So I think it's a mixed way of looking for a therapist, but yeah.
That's
Yeah, it's tough
amazing.
to find a good therapist. I haven't found one yet, unfortunately. And it's expensive too. It's not covered by general insurance, probably max $500 a year. Yes. So it's hard to find one, and it's expensive to find one too.
Yeah, initially I felt very bad changing my therapist the first time. And I'm such a people pleaser. I just wanted to, be with them and be like, you know what? I know it's not working. My gut's saying it's not working. I'm not able to cry in front of this person. I don't feel safe. But let me just keep at it. But eventually it came a point where I talked about it to my friends and they suggested, hey, it's okay to look for different people and, just keep trying until you find someone you feel comfortable with. And then I found someone, and yeah, she's amazing. And it's been a life-changing experience, to be very honest. In India, growing up, even with my parents, even to this day, therapy is not something good. Every time I tell them I'm sad, they just say, oh, go for a walk and your sadness is going to go away. And it's just culturally not very acceptable because they kind of see you in a different way also. So it was very hard to put my foot down and identify this is what I needed and just go do something that really really helped me. I kind of felt selfish doing it as well. Now with time, after 2 years, I think it's been life changing and I can't imagine my life without therapy.
Okay, I'm gonna change the topic a little bit. So we has been talking about grief and handling death and loss. Now I want to talk about what we all felt, the grief of migration. We each left our home countries and we lost maybe languages, smells, foods, communities. What are your thoughts on that kind of grief?
Oh, very loaded. But yes, I'm open to unpacking that. So my family originally is a partition family. So Joel probably have some context about this, but my grandmother grew up in what's now Pakistan, right? So I think like many Indians,
Mhm.
we've had that sort of going away from home and having to rebuild. I also come from an armed forces background, which meant that your home is where your parents and your family are. It's not really, sometimes
Mm.
it's not a place. So when somebody says, where are you from? I'll say I'm North Indian, but I've grown up in South India. And growing up in a military culture is slightly different than growing up in a civilian culture. So I felt like there were times I feel like I've held that kind of loss or grief in different ways, or just the ambiguity of it, where I think that might be a better word, where never, I oftentimes didn't feel like a civilian in my own country. But then when I came here, it was the second time that I had traveled abroad. And I pretty much came here with a one-way ticket by myself. And I, I don't think that there's a time where you settle, like you take time to settle and you realize that you are a little bit a part of this culture. And I recently learned this term about a third culture, but it's essentially like you're neither there, you're neither here, you're
Third
just,
culture kid. Yeah.
thank you.
That's
Third culture
basically that's
kid.
basically who I am. Yeah.
Yeah, same here. But yeah, so I feel like there are times where you definitely connect to some aspects of, you know, some things like safety, some things like, being having a certain part of my life stage here. But I definitely feel, I think the thing I miss the most is just not being around my family. And because there are just those unspoken languages, right? You go back home and everything makes sense. But then you come here and some things also make sense. And I kind of like who I am here. And I also like who I am there with family. And so it becomes the space to build your own identity, but also not lose, but you're using the values that you have and that you've learned that continue to help you grow. I don't think there's ever a time where I don't miss being at home, but I also recognize that this is a stage in my life where I'm here. It definitely makes it harder to find community here. I think, like, as contrasted to India, like, even if you don't want people around you, they're just there. And then you kind of just fall into that pattern. Here, I had somebody knock on my door today, and I don't remember the last time somebody knocked on my door, unless it was, and today it was a FedEx person, but I completely forgot. And so when somebody knocks on my door here, I think something bad is something bad has happened and someone's come to
Mm-hmm.
give me some information. Whereas at home, your doors are open, like neighbors walk in, your friends walk in. It's a lot of context switching. But I definitely feel like over the years, I've gravitated towards people who come from a similar cultural background because we have similarities in food and in the way we've been brought up, in the experiences that we've had. And I think that is sometimes what I think I love about Toronto is that it takes a lot of time. I'm not going to lie, but I think you slowly start to find people like you. And I think that sort of widens your range, but there is that sense of, I completely acknowledge that there's that sense of not fully feeling that you're here because your mind is always in some part of the world. It's not like someone's living down the street and therefore it's very far away when you have to think about things like, to me's point, of having to take that flight and having to do many extra things when something logistical or emotional happen. And I think that those things, they continue to weigh on me, but I also feel like it it then creates a lot of good non-negotiables for me. I think I've been able to spend a lot of time with my family over the years, despite having those concerns of being far away, which have been helpful. So yeah, I wonder what do you feel?
Yeah, I agree. I feel the same. When I'm here, I feel like, oh, I'm not Canadian enough to be a Canadian. And then when I'm back home, I don't feel like I'm Vietnamese enough. I was born and raised there for 20 years of my life. But after 10 years living in Canada, I obviously didn't know a lot of new slangs, new trends, new words back home. I feel like a grandma sometimes when I go back home and then talk to my cousin. But again, I'm very grateful to live in Canada and Vancouver because I feel like no one forced me to be white, to be a Canadian. I can embrace my Vietnamese self and it's a new me. It's the old Vietnamese girl and then the new, I don't know, somewhere in between. But everybody's okay with that. It's really nice that Canada is not a melting pot. It's like I would say it looks like a kaleidoscope. Like you look into a tunnel and you see a lot of colors and it's all beautiful in its own way. You don't have to be someone else. So I feel like, yeah, when I first came here, I did go through some kind of, I guess, grief about my old self. But right now I'm kind of past that point and I think I'm embracing the new identity. Like it's okay to be me. I don't have to I don't have to be the Vietnamese here. I don't have to be a Canadian either. So yeah, I think if you left yourself, I think everybody have to go through that part, unfortunately. But once you pass that painful journey, it's gonna be beautiful. And you're gonna love yourself. Yeah.
That was really beautiful, Anne. Damn. It sounded so poetic. But I feel like for me, it's hard to say because I was already a Vietnamese growing up in Russia. So when I was younger, I was already having an identity crisis. I cannot be totally Vietnamese, but I'm also clearly not Russian. When I was growing up, I was the only Asian person in school until like be grade 9. And back then, I was feeling very Russian because I wanted to be Russian, right? I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be acknowledged. I wanted to be within community. And then when I was 18, this was the first time that I started getting introduced to a Vietnamese community. And this is where like Vietnamese side started like grow a little bit. Before that, there was no Vietnamese side. I remember telling my mom, I'm Russian. Like, I don't care what you're saying. Like, I'm Russian. She was like, you're not. Like, you're not. Maybe you were born here, but you're not. And I was like, no, I'm Russian. But then once I started talking to Vietnamese people more, this is where my like Vietnamese identity kicked in. And I started like growing to love Vietnam and starting to be proud that I'm Vietnamese and, respect my culture a lot. And then I came to Canada. So then I need to assimilate as fast as possible. So I feel like I don't really think about the crisis as in a sense of like, oh, I don't know where I belong, because I feel like I belong everywhere. And I feel like when I'm in Canada, everyone gets to meet the Canadian me version. When I'm in Russia, all my friends know my Russian version, and it's two different, very different versions out there. And then when I'm in Vietnam, there's this like going in a third version, which is kind of close to, I guess, to any other versions. I'm still kind of me, but I'm also a different person. So yeah, it's just like bipolar disorder, but in a nicer way. Saying it in a nicer way, but this is true. I'm proud that I can connect with multiple cultures, and I think it's a cool thing to do.
100% agree.
Yeah.
What about you, Joel?
Well, I agree with all of you guys. I feel like initially I wanted to embrace Canada because I was like, hey, I'm going to live here now. I have a one-way ticket. I'm not going back home. So I need to embrace it. I need to just do things according to Canada and somehow like not care about where I come from. But that gave me a huge identity crisis. And then I realized I cannot be Canadian. I am Indian and I need to be proud of that and embrace it as much as I have embraced Canada and just keep both parts and then just embrace the new me. I don't have to be fully Canadian or fully Indian. I can just choose what I like and keep the parts that I like. And it took a while to get there, but initially I wouldn't wear any loud colors. I wouldn't like celebrate any festivals. But then I realized I missed that so much. And I still want to, wear colors. I still want to celebrate things. And I still want to do Canadian stuff as well. So I'm just going to keep both things. And yeah, it's hard to move abroad and, identify what we like and have a new identity in a whole different world.
Yeah, it reminds me of what my cousin told me. She's 2 years younger than me, but she told me something that really inspiring to me, and it's kind of stick with me until now. She say, "Well, if you don't love your countries, you don't love yourself. If you don't love your country and you don't love yourself, who's gonna love you?" So after that, I realized you have to embrace your heritage. You have to embrace your identity. It's very important. Otherwise, you will always have an identity crisis, right? Yeah, I think that's all we're going through.
That's true. Okay, after all the heavy talk, let's turn it into a fun game. So let's play this game called Grief, Myth, or Fact. So, Kritika, we're going to read out a few statements and you let us know what you think. Even Anne and me, just let us know what you think as well. So, the statement one is grief follows 5 clear stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Myth or a fact?
I'm constantly in denial, so I don't know if my opinion actually matters here. So I will let Kritika to answer this question.
So I would say it's a bit of both. It's a very renowned grief expert who came up with the language of the 5 stages of grief. That was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And I think that the laying out of those 5 stages makes a lot of sense because we do tend to go through them. However, she, along with many people, have spoken about how mourning is not necessarily a predictable process. So you might feel denial and you might go straight to depression. You might feel like you've accepted something, and then it might hit you many years later where you're angry about something. So there's actually a beautiful book called The Other Side of Sadness. The Neuroscience of Bereavement tells us about life after loss. And it's by George Bonanno. And it's a beautiful book because it speaks to this idea that it's it's almost like an iterative process. And it's not that you're going to go through those stages in a particular amount of time either. This can go on for the rest of your life. So or it can happen very quickly. There's just like how me was saying that, denial process, or she's in the denial stage. There are people who are known as practical grievers, where they're in such acceptance of what is happening. They're very connected to understanding themselves, understanding the situation, not saying that that's right or wrong, but that is their way of grieving, that they're in complete acceptance of what happens. They will feel sad, etc., but they'll always go towards acceptance. So there's a chance that they may not go through all the stages. And it's not that if you don't go through all the stages that you've sort of left your grieving process incomplete. So I would say it's both.
Yeah, that makes sense to me because I don't think there's a clear pathway. I think there's all kinds of emotions, and even the timelines it comes in waves, like how people say grief comes in waves. And I've always felt that. Yeah. So, statement 2, most people return to normal within a year of a major loss.
Yes and no.
This would be a myth, right?
Oh, I would say
Really?
it's a myth in many ways, but I would say sometimes some people do. I don't think, I think grief,
I can see
I think
that.
mourning, yeah, like mourning is it's your own timeline. And I think, I'm quoting a lot of David Kessler, but he talks about how sometimes people ask him, what is the hardest grief? And I think his answer is just so profound. He says it's yours. So I think we tend to have a hierarchy for grief. It's like if for example, my dog died, but that death is not as important as a person dying, not as important as the way somebody died. And then you keep layering it, and it gets layered with so much of sort of shame, competition. Like nobody's winning when it comes to grief. Like it's not like you're coming first and you're getting a prize there. It's still dealing with difficult emotions. So I do believe the first year is difficult in a way that you're going through many things without them, like birthdays, like anniversaries, like you're going through a whole cycle without this person. But oftentimes people say that the second or the third year gets really hard because for the first year, a lot of people remember, right? They will say, oh, I'm thinking of so and so, like you must be missing them. There's a lot of attention that is given to your grief and your loss. But in the second year, it almost feels like people have forgotten. And that sometimes feels harder. So I would say it's more of a myth, but I can also understand. I also feel like it's okay if somebody has processed in their own healthy way without harming themselves or others and are being able to take steps towards their healing. So but I also know that a lot of people put a lot of stress on themselves to say, oh, it's been 6 months. Like, why are you still crying? Or it's been a year. You're still so upset. No, like everyone has their own paths towards it. Yeah.
Yeah, I hate that when someone it says like, "Oh, it's been so long." I'm like, "Who are you?" Like, excuse me, this grief is unbearable. Okay, like, do not tell me what
And
to do.
I think they say that time is ultimately the best, not like cure, but the best way to process it. People saying that grief is so weird because you can be absolutely functioning, everything is fine, and then you will look, I don't know, like a can of Pepsi, and then you remember like, oh, that was like my mom's favorite Pepsi, and my mom loved Pepsi. So, and then it just like hits you. So yeah, ultimately you're never getting over it.
And there's something very beautiful. I'm forgetting the person who mentioned it, but they spoke about how you don't get over grief. You sort of move forward with it. I think, it's giving me goosebumps when I'm saying
Beautiful.
this, but it gives you a way to continue moving forward with the permission that you can have those moments. And those, like what you just described me, are like grief bursts, where you could be at a grocery store and you hear a song, you start crying, or you get emotional, or you have this moment where you're remembering someone that you really loved. or you smell a perfume that someone used to wear and you have that moment, it's not predictable. And therefore, I feel like grief will stretch. There are times where you can talk about it or you can emote about it for in your own way. And some of the research and the work that we've done at Maajhi, one of my biggest learnings and realizations is that oftentimes people ask me what is the opposite of grief or sadness. And many times people think it's acceptance or hope. And in the work that we've done, I've come to realize that expression is actually the opposite of grief and sadness because it's in you.
Wow.
So many people who are creative or take up journaling or start doing something that is not necessarily about just having a conversation, but almost exploring what grief is. And I think that that's really where I think humans are beautiful in forms of expression.
Oh my God, I love that. Can we just talk all day? I really love this chat. I feel like we can chat hours and hours. I don't need therapy anymore. You
I
know,
I
know,
was
I'm
just gonna
fixed.
say,
After
I think like this is we are
after
in
this
therapy session.
conversation.
It's like a group. I feel
yeah,
like we are
this
in
is
the group
Anne's
therapy
therapy.
session, and then we're
We can
just
do
like
this
all
monthly.
like
We can do a brunch session and you can
Yeah.
come and join us online or whenever you're here.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Yeah. I'm just gonna
Yeah,
send an email to my therapist like, hey, I think I'm fixed. Like
You're
Krittika.
fired. Kritika's fired. So that was amazing. Like, I feel like I've never talked about grief because it's such a taboo topic. And this is such a beautiful space to talk about it. And, Kritika, you're master at your things and you're the right guidance for all of us to think about it differently, to reframe it differently. So thank you for helping us through this heavy conversation. I just wanted to mention to our listeners that 67% of people globally have experienced major grief in the last 2 years, and less than 30% have felt they had the tools to cope. So that's a lot. I don't think we are ever taught how to cope with it. We don't even talk about it. So, yeah, if you have any tips or any advice for people who are grieving, any kind of how to cope with it or what to do, like what's the first thing they could do?
I think it's so context dependent on what people are going through. And sometimes you also feel like your closest people don't understand what you're going through. So I don't want to say go to like a trusted family member or like a friend. Like sometimes people might say, I have nobody to talk to. I think that there are books, and I'm happy to share the links in terms of even unpacking what grief is or what loss is. There are many podcasts around it. There are many people who are very well versed in breaking down some of these concepts. Maajhi, of course, has multiple resources as well, which, happy to share with your audience. But I definitely feel like when one is grieving, and I don't want this to sound like something very airy, but I think it's so absolutely okay to grieve, to feel grief and to feel what you're feeling. I know, like, when somebody's in the thick of it, they're like, oh, yeah, thanks. Like, nobody told me that. And I know that sometimes it doesn't sound helpful, but I feel like trying different things that actually get you to feel those things are very important. Last year, for example, I went for a grief yoga session by Paul Denniston, and I, I was a bit sort of skeptical because I hadn't been to something like that before. I didn't know what I would be doing through yoga, breath work, meditation, reflection, journaling. It was almost like trying to trying to feel a full emotion, feel it, release it, and then sort of have a cooling down and then start the cycle again. Literally like how we go through that in waves. And I didn't need therapy for like a month and a half, 2 months after I was done. I actually messaged my therapist and I was like, you're wonderful, but can we take a break for like 2 months? Because I feel like I released so much and I didn't even realize that I had so much in me that I needed to release. With a sense of safety and knowing what you're getting into, it's always good to try different things to see how you feel about it. Does journaling help? Does listening to music help? Sometimes listening to sad music to make yourself cry is fine. Like, I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think that these are little tangible things you can do. Sometimes exercising helps, but doing the right exercise that feels nourishing for your body, like maybe Pilates helps, or maybe not doing something that's making you more stressed. For example, meditating, eating well, taking care of just basic things. Like sometimes people have told me that just getting out of bed and brushing my teeth in the morning is a big step for me. I think we're always waiting for this massive solution, which is going to fix everything. And I think it's in those daily practices of saying, I took care of myself. I got a glass of water for myself. It's breaking it down into things that also make you feel like you can do it. It's not about having massive breakthrough moments every single day, but it's about understanding what works for you. And I think that that does require us to know ourselves a little bit. It does require some introspection, and it does require us to say, okay, that didn't work, but I'm going to try something else. Therapy, of course, always is. I'm a massive believer of therapy and mental hygiene. I don't personally think there's anything like a good or bad emotion, but if I'm going to broadly bucket it, let's say somebody laughs or has a good time or takes some time away from their grief, or where they were able to go out and enjoy themselves. I think people should feel guilty about that. It is such a necessary part of healing yourself that I think sometimes people feel really bad if they have a good moment. And and I think I just wish more people didn't do that, because again, you're then kind of, on one hand, you didn't want to deal with grief, and now you're only dealing with that and you're not dealing with any other emotion. So I feel like that balance is very important. But before I end, I wanted to ask all of you a question, because I know that we've had very deep conversations. And the reason I'm asking this question is oftentimes in death and dying, just like the difficult topics, it's easier to talk about what we don't want instead of what we want. And so the question I actually wanted to ask you was, what do you think a good death is?
The one that is not
It's a heavy
painful.
question.
Yeah, the one that is not painful.
I
I
think
agree.
for me, if it's not painful for my loved ones, I don't care how I die. I just would feel so bad if the people I loved would be grieving, because I have also grieved loss. And that's way worse, honestly. Like, I feel I would want my people to feel happy, and just like, it's a part of life. Death happens, and I just would rather feel more comfortable if they're taken care of, and I know that, they're taken care of. Like, that would make me very comfortable.
I also want it to be a celebration of life. I want it to be like a party.
Party.
Yeah, I honestly want it to be a party. If I can afford the free bar on my funeral, that would be sick. Like, I want everyone to dress up. I want everyone to dance, and yeah, just remember me by like, just having fun. And I'm not gonna go into details about whether I believe if there is a life after that or not. But I feel like there's no better way than actually have like, a sick party to say goodbye.
So I finished a book called Tuesday with Maury by Mitch Albom. I think I want to die like Maury. So he had the funeral before he died. He had a really rare disease and he knows he's gonna die. But he thinks people say good things about you in your funeral, but you don't hear it. So he want to have a funeral before his death. He invited everyone that he loves to his funeral, and he hears so he can hear all the good things that people want to tell him. I think it's a good idea. I think I wanna do that too.
That was such a great question.
So I love that question, because, and thank you for your answers, because you've all spoken about life and you've also laughed about it, and you've also felt like you've spoken about something that's very true to you. And I feel like this is why I feel like talking about death is interesting. You're not always talking about the saddest parts of it. Like, you're talking about the things you want. And now, you can actually start planning this party. You can be like, this is my guest list, and here's who's invited and here's who's not. And then And you can make a list of like people you want to meet. And, Joel, you can speak to your family and be like, these are the things I'm concerned about, and this is what I want to start planning towards. And, it gives us one step to be like, okay, I don't want it to be like this, and I want it to be like this. And I think that allows for spaces of action. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to your parties and your instructions, Joel.
Yeah. I think thinking about that, it also give me motivation to live, I would say. Like, I would say I would try to live like I would die tomorrow. It makes me be more selective in terms of activities that I want to do and the people that I want to meet. So I don't think, thinking about that is not as bad as people think. Just imagine if you die tomorrow, what do you think you want to do the most? And so you can focus your energy to all the good things you want to do.
I agree. I've also started living in the moment more with time. The older I'm getting, the more I'm living in the moment. Not because I'm scared of death or I'm like, oh, if I die tomorrow, but more like I just want to embrace this moment right now and not overthink it and not make it into something else. I just want to be present. And I think it's hard to do that. It was very hard to like reach that point, and sometimes I'm still struggling. But I feel like it's so beautiful in just living. I want to ask the same question. What would be your answer?
Well, I've thought about the living wake for a while, what Anne was saying. But I think for me, one of the things I always say is that I feel like I'd like to go empty, where I have nothing more to give. And I don't mean that in like a morbid or sad way. I feel like, to your point, like I've come to live life and I want to do it the best that I can, and then sort of go empty. Like I don't want to have anything left in me. I want to completely utilize it and be in service of everything that I'm doing. And then that's it. And hopefully get to meet my dogs. Yeah.
That's beautiful. So, for someone listening right now, maybe they're grieving silently or they don't even have words for what they're feeling. Your grief is valid, you're not alone, and you don't have to rush into healing. You can take your time. So, until next time, be gentle with yourself and to each other. And thank you so much, Kritika, for having this conversation with us. And we have loved having you. Please come back anytime you want to
Thank
on the
you.
podcast. We would love to have you again.
Thank you so much. It was
Thank you
such
so
a
much.
pleasure to be with you.